This is Rural Exchange, affectionately known as Rex. Don't forget, tomorrow morning we give away the Carter's Tyres Pimp My Ute. Stand by for that. $10,000 to pimp your ute. Right, a new climate change group has been immediately tasked with working out how New Zealand farmers can pay for their climate pollution. And the highly controversial decision about whether and when the agricultural industry will be charged for its greenhouse gases could fall close to the next election. Now, the new interim climate change committee has been praised by farming leaders and will be tasked with setting strict carbon emission limits from next year to help New Zealand reach a zero carbon economy by the year 2050. Climate Change Minister James Shaw joins us now. Good morning, Minister. What is the goal of the Climate Change panel and who is on it? Who's doing the work here?
Well, there's 6 people in total. It's been chaired by Dr. David Prentice, who was until recently the managing director of Opus International, which is a big engineering firm. Lisa Tumahai, who's the chief exec of Ngāi Tahu and also of Ngāi Tahu Farms. And it's useful to have the kind of agribusiness knowledge in there. Dr. Harry Clark, who's the head of the Agricultural Greenhouse Gas Research Centre. Keith Turner, who's got a very long background in energy and electricity. Jan Wright, who is the former Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment, and Susie Kerr, who is a specialist in, she's an economist, but also a specialist in climate policy and emissions trading scheme. So it's a very smart group of people, yeah.
So how do you see agriculture and the emissions profile fit in these plans?
Well, I mean, that's kind of what we've asked this group to take a look at, right? So there's been a presumption right back to 2002 when the original Climate Change Response Act was written that at some point agriculture would be a part of the emissions trading scheme when the circumstances were right. But, essentially the assessment has always been that the circumstances aren't right. And so what we've asked these guys to do is to sort of take a close look at that. And in particular, there is some very good emerging science, which, Harry Clark in particular is very familiar with, but also, changes in kind of farming systems and on-farm economics and all of that kind of stuff, which are hinting at, a change in the circumstances, but we really want an independent evaluation based on some real expertise, because we're getting a lot of different, very well-researched, thoroughly thought-through briefings and advice, which also happen to be completely contradictory. So it's kind of useful to have a group of people like this who can kind of sift through all of that and say, well, here's where you want to land.
And farming groups have welcomed the new panel, but they've cautioned that there's not enough mitigation tools available yet. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, that is one of the things that we've asked this group to take a look at. And we know that there are a lot of things that farmers are doing on farm, whether it's riparian planting, managing their nitrogen inputs, a lot more carefully than we did, say, 20 or 30 years ago. Other forms of planting and so on, maybe mixed land use. And what we need to work out is how do all of those things kind of net out against each other. And that's something that is, I guess, an emerging science or an emerging technology. And it'll be essentially critical if we're ever going to do this, that we've really going to kind of break the back of that. And I'm not sure whether we're there yet. And that's one of the things that we've asked this group of people to take a look at.
Now, James, the goalposts keep moving on this subject especially. How do you believe the ETSs benefit farmers, growers and the wider New Zealand economy?
Well, the emissions trading scheme, frankly, hasn't actually worked up until this point. If you think about the point of an emissions trading scheme, it's to bring down your emissions. And in New Zealand, our emissions have gone up the entire time that we've had the emissions trading scheme. And also more forests have been cut down than planted. And so, the way that it's currently designed doesn't really work. And so one of the other pieces of work that I've got on my plate is a pretty substantial overhaul of that, which we're going to introduce later this year. And we're getting a lot of feedback from farmers, agribusinesses, and industry associations about, what will need to happen to that scheme in order to make it work, in order to make sure it does actually act as a net benefit to the economy and to the agricultural sector, rather than a kind of a hindrance or an inconvenience or a cost.
James, the Ministry for the Environment report Our Land, released on this Thursday this week, talks a lot about the heavy use of phosphorus on our farms, the soil compaction on our farms. I mean, healthy soil is like a sponge full of holes to absorb a lot of carbon. The Sustainable Farming Fund, how is that going to incentivise farmers by acknowledging that the soil carbon and the pasture secretion on their farms will be rewarded? So it's not all just going into planting more trees.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the whole field of soil sequestration is an emerging science, and it does have a lot of promise. Frankly, a lot of that work has been done offshore and in countries with quite different soil types and farming practices to what we have here in New Zealand. There is some work going on here in New Zealand, which is quite good, but we are going to need to essentially investigate that further before we're able to draw any firm conclusions. And that is some of the research work that that we need to put more effort into.
James, do you believe farmers in general are heading in the right direction, though? You know, I was at the Watershed Forum for ECAN the other week, and I was amazed what farmers in this or the Greater Canterbury region are doing. Do you believe farmers in general are heading in the right direction for you?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. And I mean, the kind of, there's a bell curve, right? In any industry, you've always got people who are at kind of the leading edge, and then you've got, kind of people in the middle, it's the kind of vast bulk, but they tend to look to those leaders and kind of look to them for inspiration and for ideas. And then you've always got a tail end as well, right? And that's true right across any industry. But it's pretty clear to me that there has been a fundamental shift in farming in the last several years, and that leading edge is really like world leading, not just within New Zealand, but right out there. And I think, frankly, because the whole world actually needs to move to lower emissions agriculture over the course of the coming decades, that then becomes a source of competitive advantage for us, right? Is to have that group of people and for us to be really pushing the boat out on that. Because then we become known as the experts and the people who are developing the patents and the IP and the technologies and the science around all of that. And that's going to be tremendously valuable to us as a country over the coming decades, because everyone in the world is going to be looking at this sooner or later. I just think we're getting to it a bit sooner than most.
And James, our credibility will also come down on how much we spend on Crown research into this. Damien O'Connor pre-election was very strong on wanting more money for primary sector research. Are you working closely on that for the ministry in terms of climate change research?
Yes, I am. Damien and I are of one mind on that. And absolutely, and he and I probably see each other more than most other ministers. I see him more than most of my other colleagues, actually, to tell you the truth. And it's because of the importance of this piece of work.
James, just one to finish with, irrigation. I see there's been a stop put on a lot of these investigations and these schemes around the country. Would it not be wise to be involved so these schemes, if they go ahead, are of high calibre and made for the future rather than something that they can get by with? Yeah, well,
that's something that we're really interested in doing, and Shane Jones, who's the other minister I spend a lot of time with, and I are quite interested in doing a piece of work which is about, because it's a bit like some of the other stuff around agriculture and the emissions trading scheme. There's been a lot of kind of toing and froing and argy-bargy about it, and not a lot of clarity around what the best practice is in terms of water management, environmental management, and versus some of the other negative consequences that we're worried about. And so that is a piece of work that we're really interested in doing.
Radio Live Rural Exchange.